Part 6. The Journey of Creation from Fantasy to Reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 53. As Xuanhuan and others gradually fell into meditation, especially after they began to feel their surroundings, the energy around them actually fluctuated slightly. This made Yuan Meng feel happy. He didn't expect that after ordinary people meditate, they could actually slightly affect the energy of the outside world. But that was all. Although Xuanhuan and others caused fluctuations in external energy, they did not attract the surrounding energy into the body as Yuan Meng expected. This. Just when Yuan Meng was slightly disappointed, his eyes suddenly condensed and he looked at Xuanhuan and others. Most people may not be able to see anything, but as the master, pseudo-master of this small world in the East China Sea, Yuan Meng can clearly see the changes that have taken place in Xuanhuan and others. I saw that Xuanhuan and others had a slight spiritual light spreading on their bodies, although they did not attract the surrounding energy. But what surprised Yuan Meng was that these spiritual lights actually slightly connected the East China Sea in the prehistoric world through the projection of the East China Sea, which is the core of the will of heaven and earth. Yuan Meng's heart moved slightly, but he did not disconnect these auras and connect with the ancient East China Sea. He wanted to see what would happen next. East Sea. And when the spiritual light on Xuanhuan and others connected to the ancient waters of the East China Sea, they all murmured involuntarily. And just like other flowers, birds, insects, and fish, the spiritual light emanating from everyone also formed 5 groups of spiritual light shadows in the East China Sea. Moreover, these 5 groups of spiritual light shadows are more solid than those of flowers, birds, insects, and fish, as if the spiritual light emitted by Xuanhuan and others has truly arrived in the wilderness. At the same time, traces of aura and thought fragments began to appear from the aura connecting the East China Sea to the shadow of the aura they projected in the ancient world, and began to disperse towards the ancient East Sea. Moreover, these fragments of spiritual light are not like ordinary fragments of spiritual thoughts, which either enter the heaven or the earth. The rest are integrated into the human world, and then they are transformed into pure spiritual energy of heaven and earth. These fragments of spiritual light scattered towards the ancient East China Sea are extremely pure and relatively unified. These aura fragments gradually sank into the depths of the ancient East Sea, and in the process, these aura fragments continued to merge with the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, becoming more integrated and complete, and completely transformed into prehistoric things. Then, perhaps because of their relative unity, these aura fragments began to gradually coalesce into one. In the end, it split into 2 parts, and one part merged into the entire East China Sea, making it solidify in an instant, and it moved towards a formal transformation. But the other part gathered a large amount of spiritual energy from heaven and earth to form a huge spiritual energy group, and finally evolved into a giant egg. Even because of the differences between world levels and levels, objects in the real world would have been greatly magnified in the prehistoric world. As an idealistic world, the influence of spiritual power is even greater. The giant egg formed by the fusion of everyone's aura fragments was hundreds of millions of feet in size. The entire dome stands on the bottom of the East China Sea, blooming with dazzling spiritual light, as if there is a faint dragon-shaped shadow, wandering uncertainly in it. This. What's this? Dragon eggs? Why did the aura of Xuanhuan and others form such a giant dragon egg? Yuan Meng was really stunned by this sudden change. But in an instant, as the absolute master of the prehistoric world, Yuan Meng already knew the cause and effect. But despite this, Yuan Meng was still extremely surprised. He did not expect that the aura fragments generated by Xuanhuan and others during meditation could be fused together due to their relative purity and unity, and a life belonging to the prehistoric world was born. This is life that truly belongs to the prehistoric world. Although it was not born independently in the prehistoric world, it was still real life. You know, excluding Yuan Meng, the 3 Tianzuns have existed in the prehistoric world for countless epochs. In these endless years, the three Tianzuns have been looking for opportunities to evolve the prehistoric world and give birth to life. However, these endless years have passed, and the three of them still gained nothing. But now, it was just a meditation by Xuanhuan and others. Because they sensed the East China Sea and developed the concept of dragon in their hearts, the fragments of spiritual light were gathered together to give birth to a dragon egg that belonged to the prehistoric world. So are there more people practicing in the East China Sea or Buzhu Mountain small world, and can more beings in the prehistoric world be born when they meditate? After all, people's hearts are complex, and it is impossible that when they sense the East China Sea, they will all think of dragons, such as the Golden Cudgel, Sun Wukong, the Third Prince Neza, etc. As for Buzhaoshan Xiaoshandi, it is even more incredible. Such as the 12 ancestral witches, the 33 heavens, and even the 6 paths of reincarnation extending from the ancestral witches to the underworld, the 18 levels of hell, etc. Among them, Buzhu Mountain is the most famous and important, and that is naturally Pangu, who transformed into heaven and earth and evolved into Buzhu Mountain. Yuan Meng was filled with excitement when he thought that if such mythical characters could be born in this eternal wilderness created by him. However, Yuan Meng quickly suppressed his excitement. Thinking about those things now was still a bit too far away. His current prehistoric world had only given birth to the first life, and it was still in the form of an egg. Fortunately, the speed of time in the prehistoric world was countless times faster than that in the real world, allowing him to be truly born in the prehistoric world in a short time. Under the countless times of time flow, the giant dragon egg at the bottom of the East China Sea, after constantly swallowing a large amount of spiritual energy from the heaven and earth, as well as the spiritual light from Xuanhuan and others, and the spiritual light fragments that escaped. It began to grow again and became more and more solid and real. In the end, the dragon egg became as big as a star, standing on the bottom of the East China Sea, blooming with infinite sacred light, like a sacred eternal sun. Even the bottomless abyss at the bottom of the East China Sea began to fluctuate violently under the pressure of this infinite sacred light. Even the evil aura in it was purified by more than half in an instant, and turned into the water-attributed spiritual energy of the East China Sea while rising. This caused the spiritual energy of the East China Sea to surge a lot in an instant, with a layer of light spiritual mist spreading above the sea level. Hey, I didn't expect this dragon egg to have such power and effect. Looking at the East China Sea and the changes in the dragon egg, Yuan Meng exclaimed, and looked at the pond in front of him, and the strength of extracting the power of the white ghost was increased again. In the bottomless abyss, the already very thin evil aura was instantly diffused again, and the rich evil aura was steaming and rolling, but it was constantly purified by the dragon egg aura and transformed into pure and rich water-attributed spiritual energy. The Journey of Creation from Fantasy to Reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 54. When the dragon egg was born, the human emperor, who was in the depths of time and space in the ancient human world, was constantly comprehending and analyzing the laws and principles of the Buzhu Mountain small world. At this time, his body also shook, and a sacred aura emanated from his body. The human emperor, as the supreme being who symbolizes all living beings and is in charge of the creation of the universe, will be blessed by the abilities and powers of all living beings. When the first living being was born in the East China Sea of the ancient human world, well, although he was just an egg now, he was still a living being after all. But after its birth, the human emperor's ability truly began to show its unparalleled power. In just an instant, the human emperor had already obtained the power and ability of the dragon egg. At the moment when his body changed, the human emperor's body trembled slightly, and he stopped to comprehend the small world of Buzhu Mountain. A pair of light golden eyes, slightly lowered, looked at the ancient East China Sea, which exuded divine brilliance. Of dragon eggs. Good. Even though his character has been polished by endless years, the human emperor couldn't help but show joy and praised him loudly. This is the prehistoric world, and the true first living being is naturally worthy of celebration. Well, although it is just a word good, the dragon egg is already blessed by immeasurable human power. And that's not all. The heavenly lord and the underworld emperor also looked down at the dragon egg and nodded slightly. Naturally, there will be heavenly luck favoring you, and earthly luck coming down. At this moment, that dragon egg can be said to be a veritable son of the prehistoric world, the destined protagonist. However, as the first real living being in the prehistoric world, he is indeed qualified to enjoy such treatment. Crack. Crack. I don't know how many years have passed, but the dragon egg that had been standing quietly suddenly made a crisp sound. In the next moment, the entire dragon egg suddenly shattered and turned into starlight all over the sky. Ang! A billion-foot-long divine dragon snaked out from it. After a vigorous dragon roar, the divine dragon suddenly jumped out of the East China Sea and soared above the 9 heavens. Moreover, its already huge body began to grow rapidly again, becoming gigantic every moment. A large amount of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth was drawn by it and integrated into his body, even making the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in the entire East China Sea become a little thinner. In just a few breaths, it has already exceeded the size of an ordinary star. When Shenlong completely stopped growing, its body length was no longer smaller than the diameter of an ordinary star system, which was nearly a light year in length. At this time, the dragon soaring in the 9 heavens landed naturally, like a ghost, blending into the East China Sea silently. The endless water of the East China Sea seemed to not exist, and the dragon was still shuttled through the East China Sea at an extremely fast speed. In just a few breaths, it had arrived at the place of its birth again. Looking at the eggshell fragments floating in the sea, the dragon roared again. The countless eggshell fragments began to bloom with immeasurable divine light, and began to gather in front of Shenlong, and finally merged with each other, turning into a palace group comparable to a galaxy. At the main entrance of the palace, there are the words East China Sea Crystal Dragon Palace, which are blooming with radiant light, illuminating infinite time and space and billions of dimensions. Although he doesn't know why, Shenlong knows that he is the first living being in the world. Shenlong can be called the ancestral dragon, the source of the dragon clan and the ancestor of all dragons. He is innately sacred and knows it from birth. He should have his own residence dragon palace. Therefore, the ancestor dragon instinctively gathered the eggshell fragments that hatched itself, and condensed such a huge dragon palace according to the memories that emerged in his heart. After Zilong condensed the dragon palace, he waved his dragon tail and wanted to enter the palace. But at this moment, as if he felt something, the dragon's head raised slightly and looked towards the bank of the East China Sea. On the bank of the East China Sea, there are 5 groups of spiritual light shining, and the fragments of spiritual light are falling into the East Sea, floating and integrating into the body of the ancestor dragon. Ang! Zilong tilted his head in confusion, and immediately showed a look of understanding. A purified divine dragon power was extracted from his body, and flew out of the East China Sea in an instant, wrapping the 5 groups of spiritual light like a galaxy, slowly seeping into the aura. Perhaps it is because the prehistoric world is a semi-illusory idealistic world. After the remaining 90% of people resonated with the prehistoric world, some of their inner thoughts had some impact on the prehistoric world. It is also because of the meditation of several people that their spiritual light is pure, and the thoughts they generate are also extremely pure and unified. The first time they saw the vast East China Sea, everyone not only sighed at the vastness of the East China Sea, but also had an idea at the same time, that is, the divine dragon, the East China Sea Dragon Palace, the East China Sea Dragon King, etc. After all, the Dragon King of the East China Sea is too famous. It was precisely because of the convergence of a few people's auras that not only the birth of Zilong was born, but also the concept of the East China Sea Crystal Dragon Palace was engraved in Zilong's heart. Especially after the birth of Zilong, because of seeing the real dragon, the spiritual thoughts of several people became more and more pure and unified, and more pure spiritual light fragments continued to pour into Zalong's body. This naturally attracted Zalong's attention. After all, everything in the real dimension will be magnified to the extreme in the semi-illusory prehistoric world. For Yujukan and others, the fragments of spiritual light that were scattered may not be worth mentioning. They are just the natural overflow and emission. But for the prehistoric world, it is already a considerable force. If it is transformed into pure spiritual energy of heaven and earth, it is even enough to evolve a large river in the prehistoric world. And what are the rivers and lakes in the prehistoric world like? Each river is at least as wide as billions of light years, enough to accommodate endless galaxies. Such a huge force may not be a big deal compared to Zalong's extremely condensed power. Even if it is swallowed by it, it will not make it grow much. However, it is enough to attract his attention. As the first creature in the prehistoric world, it can be said to be innately sacred. The three ways of heaven, earth, and man favor it at the same time. For many things, it can be said that you can see it at a glance and understand it at a thought. Therefore, when he saw the aura of Yujukan and others, he already knew all the causes and consequences, the whole story. However, Zalong did not have any idea about this, because no matter where he came from in the beginning. However, from the moment he was born, he was already the first creature in the prehistoric world, and he belonged to the innate sacredness of the prehistoric world. Just like everyone in the real world knows that whether it is human beings or other lives, they are all conceived by their parents, and no one has ever expressed any objection to this. And when we are born, we are all independent individuals, not the appendages of our parents. Just like Zalong, although he was born from the aura fragments of several people, when he was born, he was also an independent individual. Although he has a causal relationship with Yujukan and others, he is not their appendage. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Journey of Creation from Fantasy to Reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 55. Of course, although Zalong was born because of several people, this does not mean that these people are Zalong's parents. This is just an analogy. Although the ancestral dragon was born from the aura fragments of several people, the aura fragments were more of an introduction, and more of it was due to the reasons of the prehistoric world. Because if the prehistoric world wants to develop and grow, other lives need to be born. In addition, the prehistoric world is an idealistic world. It was under the guidance of a few people's aura fragments, taking the various illusory laws and avenues of the prehistoric world as the core, integrating those aura fragments, and the endless spiritual energy of heaven and earth, and then the ancestral dragon was born. In fact, Zalong does not have much involvement with a few people. At most, there is some causal connection. Of course, it was because Zalong, Yujujhan, and others had such a cause and effect that he noticed Yujujhan and others in an instant and fed back some power to everyone. Otherwise, as the first living being in the prehistoric world, he is innately sacred and absorbs the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, which will be poured in from all over the sky. How could he possibly notice in an instant that although everyone's spiritual energy of heaven and earth is pure and can enhance his essence, it is just like a big river? It is even more impossible to notice that the few auras of Yujujhan and others will not be given to a few people with their own power. However, perhaps because of the auras of several people, after being projected into the wilderness, they became illusory and too weak. Zalong thought that these people were very weak, so he only used his own insignificant strength. Well, in his opinion, his insignificant power was already extremely huge to the auras of a few people, and it was incomprehensible. The aura of not seeing a few people is only a few meters at most. Well, if this were the beginning of the prehistoric world, the auras of a few people might be thousands or tens of thousands of miles in size. But after Yuan Meng analyzed the true spirit of the white ghost and upgraded the prehistoric world for souls, spiritual bodies, etc. in the real world, after entering the prehistoric world, they may still become extremely large due to individual differences. But it can only reach tens or hundreds of meters in size at most, and will never have a size of thousands or tens of thousands of miles. And people like Xuanhuan, who can only project their own spiritual light into the wild world and form a group of spiritual light several meters in size, is already extremely remarkable. As for the power of the divine dragon given by Zilong, it is directly like a galaxy. Perhaps according to Zilong's idea, the spiritual light of Yujukan's people should be nurtured in that huge power and grow better. It's just obvious that he doesn't know the essential difference between the prehistoric world and the real world. His so-called huge power may not even be able to lift an ant in the real world. After giving 90% of his power to a few people, Zilong flicked his dragon tail, and his body meandered around. At a speed exceeding the speed of light, he entered the depths of the huge dragon palace comparable to the Milky Way, and fell into a deep trap. In deep sleep. He is still just a newborn dragon and needs plenty of rest and sleep. But the remaining 95 people who were meditating with their eyes closed seemed to be frightened. The peaceful aura emanating from their bodies suddenly retracted into their bodies, and they suddenly opened their eyes, breathing heavily. Yuan Meng did not speak, but looked at the 5 people quietly. And the 5 groups of auras in the vast East China Sea suddenly disappeared at this time. Feeling the disappearance of the aura, Zilong opened his eyes slightly and glanced towards the East China Sea. He couldn't help but be slightly surprised as to where the aura had gone. Leaved. In the next moment, Zilong also knew the whereabouts of the auras of Yujuhan and others. However, Zilong only knew that the auras of Yujuhan and others had left the ancient world, but he did not know the specific details. But if you don't know, you don't know. Although Zilong is innately sacred and knows it from birth, it is also for the prehistoric world. Moreover, after all, Zilong had just been born and had a pure mind. After knowing that several people had left the ancient world, he had no intention of going into details. Instead, he naturally closed his eyes again and fell into a deep sleep. After a long while, Yujuhan and the others gradually came back to their senses, and their breathing gradually stabilized. Uncle Yuan. You would never have imagined what I just saw. Yujuhan, who was full of shock, looked at Yuan Meng and said incredulously. Oh, what did you see? Yuan Meng was non-committal and just asked with a faint smile. I just seemed to have arrived in the vast East China Sea. Although the East China Sea I have been to seems completely different from what I just saw, there was a voice in my heart telling me that it is the East China Sea. Well, so what? Maybe it's just your hallucination. It's just that you have been to the East China Sea and feel that way now. Yuan Meng still smiled lightly, his voice neither fast nor slow. No. That's definitely not an illusion. I really feel like I'm in the East China Sea. Yujuhan shook his head repeatedly in denial, and was very sure that he had indeed seen the East China Sea. Yes. I also feel like I'm on the shores of the East China Sea. Yeah, me too. Well, the moment I saw the vast ocean, there was a voice in my heart telling me that it was the East China Sea. Zhao Li and others also nodded repeatedly, saying that they had also seen the East China Sea. Yeah, you saw it, too. There was another dragon born from the East China Sea, and then the Crystal Dragon Palace was opened up. When he heard that Zhao Li and others had also seen the East China Sea, Yujukan was even more excited, talking about the dragon he saw, from birth to the opening of the Crystal Dragon Palace. You saw the dragon? Really, or fake? Yuan Meng seemed to be interested, sitting up straight, looking at Yujukan and others. Yeah. Not only that, the dragon also gave us a ray of divine power, which was too shocking, just like a galaxy. Yes, yes, yes. Seeing that Yuan Meng seemed interested in this, Yu Jukan and others nodded repeatedly to confirm and repeated what they saw. Well, maybe when you entered meditation, you had some kind of qi interaction with the dragon or the East China Sea you mentioned, so you can see the East China Sea, or the illusion of the dragon. After listening to the description of Yu Jukan and others, Yuan Meng pondered for a moment and then expressed his guess. For them in reality, everything they see can indeed be called an illusion. After all, even the entire prehistoric world can be said to be an illusory existence, and the East China Sea is naturally no exception. Well, not to mention the dragon, it was originally born from their imagination. It was in everyone's mind that the idea and concept of the dragon came first, and then in the fragments of everyone's spiritual light, the existence of the ancestor dragon was bred, which is even more of an illusion in fantasy. The journey of creation from fantasy to reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 56. No, 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 that is definitely not an illusion. Otherwise, how can we explain the divine power that the dragon gave us? After Yuan Meng said that what they saw might be just an illusion, Yu Zhizhen hesitated for a moment and started arguing again. Oh, the divine power of the dragon? Then where is the divine power that the dragon gave you? Yuan Meng smiled slightly, with a strange light in his eyes, and looked at Yu Zhizhen and others and asked. He also wanted to know what effects and consequences the ancestral dragon's power integrated into their aura would have. He just knew that the power of Zilong integrated into their aura would not cause them the slightest harm. After all, Zilong was born because of Yu Zhizhen and others, and he had a natural affection for them, and he had no ill intentions in giving them power. In addition, the essence of those powers, except for the fusion and carrying of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth from the prehistoric world, is derived from the same source as them, and will naturally not cause harm to them. And the power of Zilong, although in essence, is the aura fragments of several people, fused with the aura of heaven and earth, to form a power of extremely high status in the prehistoric world. But, no matter how high the level of power is, it is only for the prehistoric world, but for reality, it is at an extremely low level. Naturally, a power with such a low energy level is even less likely to cause any harm to a few people. Even if Zilong had ill intentions towards them, or if the power would conflict with their own energy and spirit, it would only make them dizzy for a while. However, even Yuan Meng cannot know the specific details. They could only vaguely feel that the power was still in their bodies. After all, after that trace of dragon power is integrated into the aura of a few people, it is not much different from a drop of water integrated into a bucket of ink. It will be completely assimilated by them soon. Moreover, there are physical and mental barriers, making it even more impossible for Yuan Meng to detect the specific changes in his body. Therefore, he was also very curious about the few people who said they had received the power given by the dragon, and what kind of changes the power of the dragon had on these people. This. Yu Zhizhen and others looked at each other in confusion, not knowing what to say. They indeed felt that they had obtained the power of the dragon, but they did not seem to have any changes now. And when they thought of this, the eyes of several people couldn't help but dim a bit. Maybe you can meditate again. Looking at the faces of several people, Yuan Meng was also a little disappointed. It seemed that the power of the prehistoric world was really nothing after entering reality. However, he was still unwilling to give up, so he couldn't help but said to Yu Zhizhen and the others again. Yes, yes, let's try meditating again. The dragon has given us power. That's for sure. It's just that we didn't realize it. The eyes of Yu Zhizhen and others suddenly lit up, and they nodded in response. Impatiently, everyone sat cross-legged and began to meditate. But the result was extremely disappointing to several people. They continued for a while, but they never entered the state of meditation. Seeing this, Yuan Meng shook his head. It seemed that the power really didn't have much impact on a few people. You are so excited and your mood swings are so violent, how can you possibly enter a meditative state? Come on, relax and follow me. Breathe. Yuan Meng spoke lightly, guiding several people to relax. At the same time, the will of heaven and earth in this small world created a circle of invisible ripples, brushing over everyone's bodies, sweeping away everyone's chaotic thoughts, calming everyone's excitement, and a sense of tranquility and concentration came from everyone's minds. Feelings welled up in their hearts, causing several people to quickly enter a meditative state. It still has some influence. Just when several people entered the meditative state, Yuan Meng's expression became solemn, he looked at them intently, and murmured in a low voice. In Yuan Meng's eyes, a faint spiritual light appeared on Yu Zhuzhen and several others. A barely visible shadow of a divine dragon was swimming around the aura, and it was still fading, and would be completely annihilated at any time. However, as a few people meditated, tiny bits of power were peeled off from the spiritual light around them, and slowly integrated into the phantom of the divine dragon, making the continuously fading figure solidify a bit again. A trace of undetectable fluctuation rippled from the phantom of the divine dragon and spread in the small world of the East China Sea. Although it only spread a few centimeters away, it completely disappeared. However, this undetectable and extremely weak fluctuation actually triggered a trace of heaven and earth energy. Moreover, this wave of fluctuation actually resonated with the ancestral dragon in the crystal dragon palace of the ancient East China Sea. Zalong, who had been sleeping with his eyes closed, couldn't help but open his eyes again and took a look for some strange feeling, but found nothing but a vast expanse. Although he was the first living being in the prehistoric world, Yuan Meng did not give him the authority to observe the real world. Naturally, it was impossible for him to see the remaining 90% of people who resonated with him. After not noticing anything, Zalong twisted his body slightly, then closed his eyes again and fell into a deep sleep. And the moment he closed his eyes, he felt that his power seemed to have undergone a mysterious change, and at the same time it had become stronger. However, he put it behind his mind in an instant. He is now a baby dragon, growing every moment. Shouldn't it be normal for his power to increase and change? Zalong thinks so, but Yuan Meng and Renhuang don't think so. The increase in his power is secondary. The main thing is the mysterious change in his power. That is not an ordinary change. It is the essence of his power, which is transforming towards reality. In other words, if the number of mysterious changes in power is large enough, then Zalong himself and his vast power will be transformed into a real existence. It can even really enter reality. In the real world, it can fully exert Zalong's terrifying power, destroy the world, and recreate the universe. It can be done easily. Of course, if Zalong wants to achieve such a goal, it is obviously not so easy to do with his current status and power. But even so, when thinking of these, Yuan Meng and the human emperor's eyes also showed a fiery color, and they couldn't help but cast their eyes on Zalong, and then looked at Yu Zhuken and others. Obviously, Zalong's changes should be related to Yu Zhuken and others. Under the gaze of Yuan Meng and the human emperor, the phantom of the dragon outside the spiritual light of Yu Zhuken and others was constantly changing under the injection of their spiritual light power. More solid, more agile, in the spiritual light of several people, it began to wander along a certain trajectory. The journey of creation from fantasy to reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 57. As time passed, the shadow of the dragon that was roaming around the spiritual light of the few people gradually began to become smaller and smaller. However, it also became more and more solid at the same time, and finally turned into a dragon egg the size of a needle tip, which seemed to exist and not exist, illusory and uncertain. Then, the dragon egg began to grow gradually under the continuous injection of spiritual light power. And every time it grew a little, the principles and laws of the East China Sea small world seemed to have some subtle changes and became more active. These changes in the East China Sea small world, if not the East China Sea projection, were the hub of the will of the world in the East China Sea small world. Even Yuan Meng could not detect them at all, which made his expression change, and a touch of joy and excitement flashed in his eyes. And the most important thing among them was that every time this change occurred, Yuan Meng could gain some insights. However, at this time, Yuan Meng suppressed his excitement and looked at Yu Jukan and others without blinking to see what kind of changes would eventually occur. The tiny dragon egg was still growing, and in the process of growth, it seemed to have received some kind of nutrients and some kind of correction, and was gradually becoming real. After a tiny dragon roar, the dragon egg outside the spiritual light of several people suddenly broke apart, and a tiny dragon appeared, and naturally merged into the spiritual light of several people, swimming in the spiritual light, and growing again bit by bit. And in this growth process, the dragons in the spiritual light of everyone, which were originally exactly the same, began to gradually undergo completely different changes. The dragon in Yu Jukan's spiritual light was closest to the appearance of the ancestor dragon, blooming with infinite chaotic divine light, just repeating the birth, growth, and changes of the ancestor dragon in the East China Sea. However, the dragon in Zhao Li's spiritual light was completely different from the ancestor dragon. It first turned into a divine dragon with sharp golden light, then turned into a black dragon with rippling water waves, and then turned into a green dragon full of vitality, a fire dragon surrounded by flames, and a yellow dragon as heavy as a mountain. Then it changed into a wind dragon, a thunder dragon, a netherworld dragon, and a sacred sky dragon. Finally, the dragon turned back into the appearance of the ancestral dragon, but it was full of nine-colored divine light, which illuminated the spiritual light outside Zhao Li's body, which was colorful and misty. And the dragon in the spiritual light of Zhao Li's girlfriend Tang Yuping, directly bloomed thousands of thunders, and directly turned into a thunder dragon, and then no longer changed. But the color of the thunder and the aura it exuded were constantly changing. The most ordinary thunder was followed by divine thunder with various attributes, and the last two divine thunders had a hint of good fortune and a hint of the Dao rhyme of destruction. The most interesting thing was the change of the dragon in Xia Wei's spiritual light. Because the dragon in her spiritual light actually degenerated directly into a koi, shaking its head and tail, and swimming in the spiritual light. Then the koi gradually transformed and turned into a dragon again, soaring in the spiritual light. The most special thing was Yu Jukan's girlfriend and Yan Ran. The dragon in her aura actually melted away little by little, turning into a sparkling ocean, rippling in her aura, and gradually spreading all over the aura. And just as the dragon changed in everyone's aura, the change that surprised Yuan Meng and even frightened him occurred in the prehistoric world. And the most drastic change was in the East China Sea and Zilong. The changes that occurred in everyone were also happening in Zilong and the East China Sea at the same time. Ang. With a roar of dragon, Zilong's huge body flew out of the Crystal Dragon Palace, rushed out of the East China Sea, flew to the sky, and swirled over the entire East China Sea. Zilong's entire body was covered by a hazy divine light. First, the nine-color divine light was lingering, and then it suddenly withdrew and turned into a hazy chaos, and there was endless lightning flashing on its body. Wherever the ancestral dragon passed, there would be thunder and lightning, endless divine light illuminating the world, and heavy rain pouring down, as if the entire East China Sea was collapsing. Ang. After a long time, the ancestral dragon roared again, and the divine light around him gradually converged, and he restored his original appearance, but his body expanded 100 times again, becoming even bigger. The ancestral dragon's eyes were full of divine light, and he lowered his head slightly and looked at the shore of the East China Sea. Through the induction in the dark, he could vaguely feel that in that direction, in the depths of the endless time and space dimension, there was an existence related to it. And that should be the few groups of spiritual light that left the prehistoric world before. It's just a pity that he could only vaguely sense it, but couldn't really feel or see it. Well, I am still a baby, and I need to hibernate and grow. The Zilong was slightly disappointed, and then he flicked his dragon tail. His huge body, which was 100 times longer than the diameter of a star system, swam around and sank silently into the East China Sea again without causing any waves. In front of the Crystal Dragon Palace, Zilong was a little absent-minded looking at the huge Crystal Dragon Palace. Well, he was still a little dragon, and he was still so far away from the Dragon Palace that he had transformed from his eggshell. Maybe when he grows bigger than this Dragon Palace, he will be able to find out where the several spiritual lights that are related to him are. Thinking of this, Zilong's body turned into a stream of light, and in an instant he sank into the depths of the Dragon Palace and fell into a deep sleep again. Yuan Meng in the real world couldn't help but twitch his lips. The dragon baby, which is 100 times larger than the solar system. The ancestor dragon has benefited from the understanding of Yujukan and others. As the master of the prehistoric world, Yuan Meng will naturally not be less. Perhaps because the Tao and legal principles of the East China Sea are relatively active, coupled with the inclination and blessing of Yuan Meng's pseudo-heaven and earth will. Well, it is the so-called favor of heaven. When Yujukan and others were meditating, they actually pulled the Tao and legal principles of the East China Sea. Although it was only a tiny bit, it was terrifying enough. And more importantly, although the few people only pulled a tiny bit of the Tao and legal principles, as the saying goes, a little bit moves the whole thing. The little bit of Tao and legal principles that the few people pulled has already caused the entire East China Sea to undergo earth-shaking changes. The Dao and the law began to change and flow rapidly in a level invisible to everyone, and even caused the coverage of the East China Sea small world to slowly expand outward. The will of heaven and earth, with the East China Sea projection as the hub, took advantage of the opportunity of the changes in the Dao and the law to continuously penetrate into the core of this small world, carry out deeper integration, and master the East China Sea small world at a deeper level. In just a moment, Yuan Meng's control over the East China Sea small world has surpassed the Buzhu Mountain small world. Even his understanding of the Dao and the law has reached a higher level and reached a new world. It can even upgrade the chaos and prehistoric world again. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Journey of Creation from Fantasy to Reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 58. After experiencing this incident, as long as Yuan Mengtang takes action and handles the affairs of Yu Zhuzhen and others, he can start to sort out this harvest and condense and upgrade the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in the prehistoric world. By the way, the avenues of the entire prehistoric world will be adjusted so that they can also be promoted. Originally, these principles and legal principles had been integrated into the primitive chaos as soon as they were analyzed, and there was no need for secondary adjustments. However, the changes this time were mainly concentrated in the prehistoric East China Sea and the ancestral dragon. Therefore, it is still necessary to make some subtle adjustments to the prehistoric world to make it more perfect and operate more freely and reasonably. In fact, if it is not particularly urgent, such adjustments to the great Dao of the ancient world can be left to the three Tianzuns. Especially Tianzun, who was originally in charge of the ancient way of heaven, was the most suitable to do such a thing. However, if Yuan Meng cooperates with the adjustment, the speed of adjustment will be greatly accelerated and the adjustment time will be greatly shortened. What's more, Tianzun at this time is still comprehending and analyzing the Taoism and Dharma of the Buzhu Mountain small world. If he really needs to rely on him to complete the adjustment of the ancient world, it will inevitably slow down his understanding of the Taoism and Dharma. And after knowing that the entire world is undergoing unpredictable and strange changes, and that his control over the small world is not as absolute as he thought, Yuan Meng felt a sense of urgency in his heart, and was more eager for power, hoping to obtain stronger power in the shortest time. If he could shorten the time for upgrading in the prehistoric world, he would definitely try his best to do it, especially if it could be done easily like this. He would naturally be even more unlikely to let it go. Yuan Meng still doesn't know whether Yu Zhuzhen and others can really gain anything, and what kind of benefits they will get. But Yuan Meng himself has really gained a lot this time. And just when Yuan Meng was distracted, feeling the changes in the small world of the East China Sea, and comprehending this harvest, the remaining 90% of the people there had also woken up from meditation. Uncle Yuan Shu. Seeing Yuan Meng's distracted look, Yu Zhuzhen couldn't help but push Yuan Meng and shouted softly. Huh? Oh. Are you awake? How are you? Do you feel the power given to you by Shenlong? Yuan Meng suddenly came back to his senses, looked at Yu Zhuzhen and others and asked. Yeah. Some. Yes. It turns out that what we experienced before was really not an illusion. There really was a dragon that gave us power. As soon as Yuan Meng asked, Yu Zhuzhen and others immediately nodded excitedly and answered. Oh. What kind of power did the dragon give you? Yuan Meng asked again. What Shenlong gave us was not any specific power, but a method of practice. Yeah. That's right, it's a guide to spiritual practice. Oh? Can you tell me? Yuan Meng's eyes showed curiosity. He was really curious. After all, everyone doesn't know, doesn't Yuan Meng know? What Zilong gave everyone was really just a trace of pure power, but there was absolutely no technique or anything like that. After all, even the ancestral dragon itself has no method of cultivation. He only masters some of the great laws of the prehistoric world and can naturally mobilize and absorb the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in the prehistoric world. So how could Yu Zhuzhen and others obtain any skills from that pure power? There's nothing wrong with this. The fact that we were able to receive the gift from Shenlong is all thanks to you, Uncle Yuan. Without the meditation method you taught us, we would not be able to enter the East China Sea, and naturally we would not be able to see the Divine Dragon and receive gifts from the Divine Dragon. Since Uncle Yuan wants to know about the cultivation method, let me tell you what it is. Yu Zhuzhen said matter-of-factly. The rest of Zhao Li and others also nodded in agreement. Looking at everyone's performance, Yuan Meng couldn't help but nod secretly. Although he didn't need their so-called skills, he was still very worried when he saw them and were ready to tell him the skills without hesitation. I am so relieved that I am finally not what I was taught. No. You have misunderstood what I meant. I already have my own practice method, and it should not be weaker than the methods you have obtained. I am just curious about what you have obtained. Just a technique. Seeing that Yu Zhuzhen was about to recite the formula, Yuan Meng couldn't help but shook his head to stop him and said what he meant. Oh. That's it? Yu Zhuzhen paused for a moment before talking about the skills he had acquired. My technique is modeled after the ancestral dragon. I will eventually achieve the power of the ancestral dragon. When I reach great perfection, I will be able to travel through the 9 heavens of chaos and create the world. So I called this technique the ancestral dragon technique. This exercise is divided into 9 stages. The first stage is to gather the first ray of vitality in the body. The second stage is to gradually strengthen the vitality in the body. At this time, although the body has not been strengthened much, it is already immune to all diseases and is healthy. The third stage is to use the vitality in the body to continuously polish the body and let your body reach a limit. The fourth stage, at this time, the internal energy has undergone a qualitative change, and can even act on the real world outside the body. The internal energy can be used at will, and can break monuments and crack rocks, lift thousands of pounds, which is no problem at all. The fifth stage, the internal energy is further condensed, and it can even be used to use the energy to make swords, and to pick flowers and leaves. The sixth stage, It can even be done in the air, shaping and evolving the internal energy into various shapes, such as swords, spears, swords, and halberds. Although I practice the power of the ancestor dragon, I can even evolve into a dragon, phoenix, unicorn, white tiger, etc., and it will make the attacks I perform get various different emphasis enhancements. For example, the dragon can summon wind and rain, control thunder, and the phoenix can control fire, etc. Although they may not reach the level of the mythical beast, they will always be strengthened in these aspects after the successful shaping. In the 7th stage, they can already fly freely in the sky, and can even achieve the unity of man and nature, and draw the power of heaven and earth to attack and defend. In the 8th stage, they can even form their own unique domain and display all kinds of magical powers. The most powerful is the 9th stage, by which time they can already break out of the blue star and truly travel in the starry sky. Speaking of this, Yujukan couldn't help but look up at the sky, his eyes showing yearning. It's really amazing. What about you guys? A strange light flashed in Yuan Meng's eyes. Thinking of the scene he had seen before, he showed a thoughtful look, and then looked at Zhao Le and others. The Journey of Creation from Fantasy to Reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 59. Well, my technique is called 9 Transformations of the True Dragon, which is also divided into 9 stages. It can evolve into 9 different forms of true dragons. At each stage, a different form of true dragon power will evolve, and as the strength increases, the power of the previously evolved true dragons will also increase. In the end, the 9 dragons merged into one, evolved into the supreme true dragon, and split the inner world with the dragon beads, becoming the master of one world. Seeing Yuan Meng looking at him, Zhao Le introduced his skills. My technique is called Thunder Dragon Punishing Heaven. It can evolve endless thunder power. It also has 9 stages. My technique is called Fish Dragon Transformation, which is taken from the meaning of fish leaping over the dragon gate and transforming into a real dragon. It is also divided into 9 stages and can transform 9 times. Tang Yuping and Xia Yue, following Zhao Le, also introduced their own techniques. My Kung Fu may not be as good as theirs. My Kung Fu is called the Infinite Sea, which is taken from the endless oceans. It also has 9 stages. But when Anyan Ran introduced her own skills, she was slightly embarrassed to hear what others had understood. It was either an ancestral dragon or a real dragon, or it was a fish dragon transformation, and it could transform 9 times. As for her, her name is Boundless Sea, which sounds completely different from hers. Moreover, her technique cannot undergo 9 transformations, but can only superimpose her body size again and again. Each time she upgrades to a level, she will increase her body size by 100 times the previous level. Looking at Anyan Ran, Yuan Meng was a little speechless. You are not inferior to them. It may not be obvious in the early stage, but maybe you are really inferior. But when you reach the later stage and your level rises, you will be able to have a crushing advantage just by relying on your unparalleled size. Ordinary people are really not necessarily your opponents. Okay. I didn't expect that you actually got a gift from Shenlong and received Shenlong's inherited skills, and it's such a powerful skill. Yuan Meng looked at the crowd and couldn't help but praise loudly. He almost had "too big awesome" written on his face. Ha ha ha, no, no. Listening to Yuan Meng's praise, Yu Zhichen and others all smiled and waved their hands modestly, but the corners of their mouths almost reached the back of their ears, showing their inner excitement and joy. It's a pity that we came back too early and only absorbed a little bit of Shenlong's power. You must know that the power given by Shenlong was like a galaxy, covering the sky and the earth for tens of thousands or hundreds of millions of miles. At the end, Yu Zhichen shook his head and sighed again. After hearing Yu Zhichen's sigh, Yuan Meng couldn't help but twitch the corner of his mouth in a strange way. The power was not just like a galaxy, let alone tens of thousands or hundreds of millions of miles, but it was really as huge as a galaxy. Just. Yuan Meng looked strangely at the bank of the East China Sea, where there was a thin cloud-like power, floating in the wind towards the East China Sea. At this time, the power of the ancestral dragon was so thin and shrunk to the extreme that it was only a few hundred meters in size at most. Compared with the previous one, which was as huge as a galaxy, it was really not even as good as a grain of sand. You have not absorbed a trace of the dragon's power. Instead, most of the dragon's power has been absorbed by you, leaving only the outermost remnants of power. What causes this misunderstanding is actually a kind of information asymmetry. There is no difference in size. Whether viewed from the perspective of Zilong or Yu Zhichen and others, Zilong's power is comparable to the galaxy. But the quality is very different. So even if Yu Zhichen and others absorbed most of the power, after the transformation of their personalities and the aura integrated into their bodies, it would only be an insignificant trace. Even if they hadn't meditated again in a short period of time, then as time went by, that trace of power would have been quickly worn away, and there would no longer be any trace. Therefore, for them, it is true that they only absorbed a trace of the power of the dragon, but in fact, they have completely absorbed the power that is as huge as the galaxy. However, they were enveloped by the power of the ancestral dragon, and they were so confused that they could not see clearly what was going on around them. They did not see that the power of the divine dragon had been completely devoured by them, and they only thought that they had only swallowed and absorbed a little bit. However, Yuan Meng had no intention of explaining, nor could he explain why he knew this, so he could only let them continue to misunderstand. Come on, let's continue to practice. We must achieve the separation of Yuan Li from the body as soon as possible. When we encounter those ghosts, we must punch every child. Although they felt a little tired, the excited Yu Zhichen and others had no intention of stopping. Instead, they were enthusiastically preparing to practice again. Okay, you have been practicing for a long time. You need to slow down for the time being. Relaxation is the real way to practice. If you continue to practice, not only will you not be able to become stronger quickly, but you may also damage your foundation, which will have a great impact on your future growth. Seeing that everyone was preparing to practice again, Yuan Meng couldn't help but hurriedly stop them. Although they had the blessing of the will of heaven and earth in the small world of the East China Sea, everyone got twice the result with half the effort when comprehending the skills. However, after all, this still has to rely on themselves, and even a trace of Taoism and legal principles have been triggered. In addition, with the fragments of aura that had previously spilled and merged into the ancestral dragon, how could everyone not suffer any loss at all? Before everyone finished meditation and woke up, the spiritual light emitted by several people had already begun to dim. If it continued, it would definitely cause some unnecessary damage to several people. It was just the excitement of having just obtained the cultivation method that made them temporarily ignore the physical fatigue. Oh. Okay. Feeling that they were indeed a little tired, Yu Zhichen and others thought about it and did not force themselves to insist, but nodded and agreed. After all, several people were not ignorant of what was good and what was bad. They could still distinguish what was good and what was bad, and they could all listen to persuasion. Although they listened to Yuan Meng's advice, Yu Zhichen and others were always distracted for a while, obviously still thinking about their own cultivation methods. Yuan Meng shook his head and stopped caring about them. This was originally a very normal thing. Anyone who suddenly got such a great opportunity and could embark on the path of cultivation, or even immortality, would definitely not be able to treat it calmly. Looking at the sky, it was already sunset, so he personally went to the kitchen and cooked dinner, and then asked everyone to rest after dinner, and reminded them not to practice casually. After using his mind to sense, he saw that they were quite obedient. Although they tossed and turned in bed and had difficulty falling asleep, they would occasionally exchange a few words in a low voice, but they did not practice secretly in private. Yuan Meng also nodded secretly. The Journey of Creation from Fantasy to Reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 60. Teachers always like obedient children. Let's not talk about anything else. You must at least distinguish the priorities and know what to do and what not to do. Everyone has lost a lot of energy now, and it is really not suitable to practice immediately. At this time, everyone knows the importance and does not practice rashly. Yuan Meng was naturally extremely satisfied. Even though he had no intention of recruiting anyone as his disciples, he did not want the people he taught to be reckless and ignorant. Seeing that everyone was tossing and turning and having difficulty falling asleep, Yuan Meng did not feel that everyone was weak in character or concentration. It would be difficult for a normal person to fall asleep quickly without any worries if he got such a great opportunity. Thinking of this, Yuan Meng couldn't help but smile slightly and tapped his fingers lightly on the edge of the bed. Pa! Pa! The sound was crisp and not loud, but it was accompanied by an invisible ripple and spread throughout the entire small world of the East China Sea. The clear mind and concentration washed away the distracting thoughts in the hearts of all living beings. The disturbed moods of Yu Zhuzhen and others calmed down in an instant, and they soon fell into a deep sleep. Not only Yu Zhuzhen and others, but also the insects in the small world of the East China Sea fell silent at this moment. Even the fish swimming in the pond stopped swimming rapidly, relying only on instinct to maintain the balance of their bodies, and floated quietly in the water of the pond. Suddenly, the entire small world of the East China Sea became silent, and no sound was heard. Seeing that the matter had been settled, Yuan Meng no longer hesitated and lay on the bed, his mind entering the ancient world. After analyzing the principles of Tao and Law, it is nothing more than repeating the previous actions, condensing the aura of heaven and earth in the prehistoric world, adjusting the avenues of the prehistoric world, and advancing chaos and prehistoric world again. In fact, it does not take long for this advancement to be completed. However, this advancement has also caused the spiritual energy in the prehistoric world and chaos to drop significantly again. Although the prehistoric world has Buzhu Mountain and the small world of East China Sea, it is constantly replenished, and even after the world is promoted, the speed of extracting power is increased. However, it will still take a long time to increase the concentration of heaven and earth spiritual energy in the entire prehistoric world again. This is something that can't be helped. Who made the prehistoric world too big? Moreover, the level 3 heaven and earth spiritual energy particles have also been reduced 10 times and their energy has been increased 10 times. Calculated in this way, the concentration of spiritual energy in the prehistoric world has been reduced by 100 times again. In other words, if you want to restore the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in the prehistoric world, you will need 100 times the energy as before. What's more, there is an endless world of chaos beyond the prehistoric world, which also requires a large amount of chaos power. The energy intensity of the power of chaos is a level higher than the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in the prehistoric world. If the spiritual energy of heaven and earth can hold 10 times the energy, it will also shrink in size 10 times. Then the power of chaos will be able to accommodate 100 times the energy while shrinking the volume 100 times. Thinking about it this way, it is definitely not that easy to restore the aura of the entire chaotic world to its previous level. After all, the current speed of energy conversion in the prehistoric world has its limit, and unlimited conversion cannot be achieved. It is not easy to replenish the vast and endless chaos power in a short period of time. However, Yuan Meng has no good way to solve this problem. He can only slowly absorb the energy from the outside world in the future, or wait until chaos and prehistoric times are perfected, and energy can self-circulate, derive, and grow before it can completely solve this problem. Otherwise, every advancement in the prehistoric world will cause the spiritual energy of the prehistoric world to decline significantly. And in addition to the spiritual energy of the prehistoric world, which was already thin and dropped 100 times, The prehistoric world itself, because of another advancement, has made the entire prehistoric world grow again, expanded a lot, and become even more vast and vast. In addition to these, the rest of the prehistoric world has also undergone changes. The mountains and earth have become thicker, the sky has become higher and farther, and the sun, moon, and stars have also become more solid. All these require more spiritual energy from heaven and earth to be filled. After all, everything in the entire prehistoric world is originally composed of spiritual energy from heaven and earth. It can be imagined that the concentration of heaven and earth spiritual energy contained in the prehistoric world suddenly became thinner by thousands of times. However, although this has caused the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in the prehistoric world to become much thinner. However, UN men gained more benefits. Not to mention the significant increase in carrying capacity after the prehistoric promotion, let's just say that his control over the spiritual energy of heaven and earth has been greatly improved. If the power of Zilong is integrated into the bodies of Xuanhuan and others at this time, UN men will even be sure to sense some situations in their bodies, and he will still have control over the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. And not only that, his control over the small world of East China Sea and the small world of Buzhu Mountain has been greatly strengthened again. This made him more able to control the two small worlds, and penetrated deeper into the core of the small world, making the connection between the prehistoric world, the East China Sea small world, and the Buzhu Mountain small world even closer. This also makes the shadows of the creatures in the real world in the East China Sea not dim and illusory again after the promotion of the prehistoric world. Instead, they are several times clearer. If you don't look closely, they seem to be real life. However, unlike other things in the prehistoric world, which have become more vast and majestic, its size has shrunk by more than 100 times again. If there are creatures in the small world of Buzhu Mountain, I believe the same changes will occur. And the first creature in the prehistoric world in the East China Sea, which is also the first innate sacred figure in the prehistoric world Zilong, has also undergone the same changes. Zilong's body has also shrunk by more than 100 times after the prehistoric world has been promoted, but its strength has not weakened, and it is still the same as before. Well, its own strength has indeed not changed. However, the spiritual energy of the world that it can mobilize from the outside world is indeed much weaker. After all, the spiritual energy of the world in the prehistoric world is now 100 times more condensed and heavy. If you want to mobilize the same spiritual energy, even if you don't need to consume 100 times the mental power before, you will need to consume at least dozens of times more mental power. The world seems to have changed. The sleeping Zilong also opened his tightly closed eyes after the world was promoted, and looked around the world in confusion. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Journey of Creation from Fantasy to Reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 61. Zilong woke up again and felt that the world of the prehistoric world seemed to be thicker and the pressure was a little stronger. There was an invisible force of restraint pressing on his body, imprisoning his figure. This made Zilong feel very uncomfortable, and he couldn't help but use the power in his body to shake the dragon's body slightly. Boom! A terrifying undertide immediately erupted from the bottom of the East China Sea, rushing in all directions, and set off a terrifying tsunami billions of meters high above the East China Sea. This is the prehistoric world. Apart from the ancestral dragons, there are no real living beings. Otherwise, billions of living beings would be buried under this sudden and terrifying tsunami. In addition, the space around Zilong was even more cracked, revealing a series of dark space cracks, which scratched Zilong's body and splashed sparks. These space cracks did not harm Zilong at all, but they also made him feel itchy, which made him feel very uncomfortable. However, he finally gradually adapted to the changes in the prehistoric world, restrained his vast power, and no longer caused interference to the surrounding environment. Although Ancestral Dragon is an innate saint in the prehistoric world and can be known from birth, after all, he was born not long ago, and he is the only living being in the entire prehistoric world, so his mind can be said to be extremely simple. Therefore, he was only slightly confused about the changes in the prehistoric world. After adapting to the changes in the prehistoric world, he no longer paid attention to them. He did not even have gods and the way of heaven. Obtaining the reasons for the changes in the world from the way of heaven was already another step. Close your eyes and fall into a deep sleep. After completing this transformation of the ancient world, Yuan Meng returned to his mind. Seeing that it was still early in the outside world, he also closed his eyes, relaxed his mind, and fell asleep. As he said before, the path of spiritual practice must always be relaxed and relaxed. Yuan Meng is indeed eager to increase his strength quickly, but he is not in a hurry. These 2 short days were not too long, but too many things had happened. Xuanhuan and others arrived and lost contact. Fighting with that weird thing, taking control of the small world of Buzhu Mountain, controlling the small world of East China Sea, and then Xuanhuan and others meditated and understood the techniques, and the prehistoric world was transformed one after another. The combination of all these things made even Yuan Meng feel a little exhausted. Now that he had a little intoxication, he could better relax his tense heartstrings in the past 2 days. When I woke up again, it was already 3 o'clock in the morning. There was a small noise of laughter in the courtyard, and they were discussing each other's skills in low voices from time to time. Apparently, seeing that Yuan Meng had not gotten up yet, for fear of disturbing him, they suppressed their words and made noisy noises. Uncle Yuan. Morning. Uncle Yuan. You wake up. Uncle Yuan. Breakfast is ready. After Yuan Meng walked out, several people who heard the movement turned around and greeted Yuan Meng. It's early for you too. Yuan Meng couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed when he looked at the sun, which was already 3 in the sky. It seems that you all had a good rest yesterday, and you are full of energy. Seeing that everyone was full of energy and not tired at all from yesterday, Yuan Meng said again. Yes. I was worried that I wouldn't be able to fall asleep when I went to sleep, but I didn't expect that I would fall asleep while lying on the bed. Haha. When people are tired, they must stay in bed. Yuan Meng smiled slightly and said casually. What he said was indeed true. In their state yesterday, they would have fallen asleep quickly even without Yuan Meng's guidance. It's just that Yuan Meng's guidance is not just as simple as making them fall asleep, but also to ease and restore their lost minds. After everyone finished eating, it was almost noon. Looking at everyone's eager and expectant expressions, Yuan Meng couldn't help but shake his head and smile. The method of practice that everyone understands does not need to choose a time and environment. As long as everyone is energetic enough, they can practice anytime and anywhere. If it is a general practice method, it is actually more taboo to practice at noon. After all, at noon, the yang energy is too strong. If you absorb too much of the power of the yang, you may not necessarily become possessed. However, it will inevitably affect the balance of power attributes in the body, leading to disorder of vitality in the body. Doing so will not only slow down the progress of your practice, but will also cause you to suffer unnecessary suffering. Even if some exercises need to be practiced at noon, they must also be practiced at Zi time to neutralize the power of the solstice at noon. Of course, if you want to say that what you practice is Xiang Kung Fu, then there is nothing much to say. This time, everyone did not go to the pond in the courtyard, but a group of people followed Yuan Meng to his previous practice room. Yuan Meng sat cross-legged on his futon and asked everyone to spread out and sit down casually. Fortunately, his training room used to be a gym, so even if everyone sits at a distance, it can still be more than enough to accommodate them. As for why they sit separately, it is naturally because they are afraid that everyone will interfere with each other while practicing. After all, we are the first batch of practitioners in this world, so no matter how cautious we are, it is never an exaggeration. Of course, in fact, with the blessing and guidance of the will of heaven and earth, and because everyone has just started practicing and has not even started, it is naturally impossible for any problems to really arise. But what should be done still needs to be done. After all, Yuan Meng has only just begun to deal with these problems. He should not know about them. Knock. Knock. Yuan Meng knocked on the floor lightly. The sound of knocking echoed in the practice room, as if there was some kind of magic, which made everyone's slightly excited mood calm down quickly. Under Yuan Meng's guidance, Yu Jukan and his group quickly entered into meditation and began to operate carefully according to their own methods. As everyone's methods were running, Yuan Meng clearly felt that the energy in the surrounding space actually began to ripple a little, and was gradually disturbed by Yu Jukan and others. Although the range of this disturbance was only within 3 inches of Yu Jukan and others, it made Yuan Meng very happy. This showed that the methods that Yu Jukan and others had comprehended were practical. In this way, they did not need to practice some of the methods they created. After all, the methods they had comprehended were definitely the most suitable for them. Yuan Meng also had some guesses as to why the skills that Yu Jukan and others, who were just ordinary people, had comprehended were actually feasible. Yu Jukan and others' initial perception, or their inner imagination, was initially influenced by the prehistoric world, such as the birth of Zilong. The skills that everyone obtained afterwards were actually their own understanding of Zilong. The journey of creation from fantasy to reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 62. Just because everyone has different understandings of the ancestral dragon, various different visions are born in everyone, allowing them to obtain different skills. For example, according to Zayu's 90% knowledge, the ancestral dragon should be born from heaven and earth, born from chaos, and possess the original power of chaos. For example, the ancestral dragon should master the most basic rules of the world, the yin and yang, the 5 elements, the attributes of wind and thunder, and eventually even evolve the world. Or perhaps the ancestral dragon should have transformed from a fish into a dragon, and then evolved and transformed step by step, before finally achieving the status of the ancestral dragon. Even like An Yan Ran, her thoughts were not placed on the ancestral dragon, but on the East China Sea that carried the ancestral dragon. Therefore, under the influence of An Yan Ran's mind, that ray of ancestral dragon power gradually transformed into a small ocean. And everyone's understanding of the prehistoric world and the ancestral dragon is naturally affecting the prehistoric world and the ancestral dragon itself. The reason for this situation is simply that the prehistoric world is a semi-illusory world, and it evolved from the power of Yuan Meng's mind and spirit, so it is naturally more susceptible to the influence of the human heart. It can be said that the prehistoric world was originally a semi-illusory and absolutely idealistic world that was completely different from reality. Therefore, when everyone was meditating and realizing the ray of divine dragon power given to them by the ancestral dragon, naturally, that ray of divine dragon power would be affected by their own cognition and move towards what they wanted. The direction of cognitive development evolves. However, at that time, they were already in the real world, both physically and mentally, including the ray of divine dragon power that merged into their spiritual light, which was also in the real world. The real world is not an absolute idealistic world like the ancient world. Even in the real world, in these small worlds where rules are active, the various rules of the Great Road, the various principles and legal principles are still true, and they are incomparably perfect. Even if it weren't for the East China Sea small world, due to unknown reasons, the rules of the world here have become much more active. And there is no will of heaven and earth in it, only the white ghost as the pseudo-will of heaven and earth exists. In the end, it was suppressed by Yuan Meng and replaced by the prehistoric heaven and earth, becoming the new pseudo-will of heaven and earth in this small world. Otherwise, given the strictness and perfection of the rules in the real world, not to mention that everyone would resonate with the prehistoric world, and even everyone's auras would converge and evolve into an ancestral dragon. Even if you want to truly enter meditation and give birth to your own spiritual light, it is impossible. However, even in the small world of East China Sea, some relatively idealistic forces can be produced. But Donghai Xiaoshanti is in the real world after all, and it is not separated from reality, although some inexplicable changes must have occurred. However, the various principles in it are still the principles of the real world, and they are real and unreal existences. This also leads to the fact that even in the small world of the East China Sea, one can have the power of idealism, but more of it must follow the avenues and rules of the real world. If that were the case, Yu Zhizhen and others would have given birth to that undetectable wisp of spiritual power, and that wisp of even more subtle divine dragon power. Perhaps as soon as reality emerged and evolved according to everyone's inner cognition, it already conflicted with the rules of reality and was completely shattered. After all, simply evolving according to what you want in your heart will definitely conflict with the rules of reality. With the insignificant spiritual power of Yu Zhizhen and others, how can they resist the rules of reality? It is nothing more than an illusion that can be broken at a touch. Just a bubble. However, when everyone was evolving, they also resonated with the prehistoric world and the ancestral dragon, plus the blessing and guidance of the will of the small world of the East China Sea. This resulted in the aura of everyone's evolution not being completely destroyed. Instead, a brand new rule evolved in reality, under the constraints of the true Tao and legal principles. This is just like molds and casting tools and supplies. As long as a specific mold is created, no matter what materials you pour, whether it is aluminum juice or molten iron, it does not matter how you pour it. However, what is finally formed must be the shape defined by the mold. The Tao and legal principles of the real world are the mold, and the cognition and imagination of Yu Zhizhen and others are the materials poured into the mold. The imagination and cognition of Yu Zhizhen and others are cast in the mold of the Tao and legal principles of the real world, and the finished product must also truly conform to the existence of the Tao and legal principles of the real world. Especially because Yu Zhizhen and others are the participants and leaders of all this. Therefore, this process of casting finished products, under the blessing and guidance of the will of heaven and earth, will inevitably form a kind of knowledge in their hearts that can be recognized and understood by them, which is the skill they have obtained. And this is the source of the skills they obtained. It was not given by Shenlong as they thought. In fact, it is just a result of their cognition and imagination, under the constraints of the Tao and legal principles of the real world, and the power of the prehistoric world of idealism. Of course, this is inevitably the result of the guidance of the will of heaven and earth. Otherwise, even if the process can be recognized and understood by them, it will definitely be messy. However, under the invisible guidance and arrangement of the will of heaven and earth, they will certainly be able to sort out a relatively complete practice. However, in any case, this is actually a practice they created by themselves, neither given by the dragon nor derived from the will of heaven and earth. From the perspective of the will of heaven and earth and Yuan Meng, the practice that everyone has comprehended is nothing more than everyone's cognition and imagination, which is bound by the rules of reality and then evolved into a new law and principle. In addition, some fragments of the real law and principle are mixed and combined together to form a special form of rule existence. Moreover, this rule is broken and fragmented, and it can only be combined into one in the idealistic prehistoric world by relying on the power of the mind, becoming a real power that can be controlled by individuals. Its representative is naturally the ancestor dragon. However, although this rule is broken and fragmented, as Yu Zhizhen and others continue to practice their own practice, constantly comprehend and analyze the law and principle between heaven and earth, and obtain more knowledge about the cognition of the world, they will naturally continue to supplement and improve it. In other words, Everyone's skills can indeed be practiced, but whether they can reach the level they want still requires them to constantly supplement and improve themselves. This is why, when everyone talks about their own skills, they are all extremely powerful, and they can create the world, evolve the world, and punish all living things in the world. But in fact, it seems that they have cultivated to the highest level in theory, which is only the reason for being able to leave the blue planet. Even if they really create the world, they can only open up a small world, or even only open up a dimensional space.